Hey you guys, so this is a little bit of a different video than what you're used to, but many of you have asked questions like, Jill, how do you do it? How do you fit gardening into your daily life? How do you do the tasks that you do? And then you've asked questions about more of the nuance of how to do certain tasks in the garden. I think a lot of these videos have been more big picture, especially recently, helping you, give you ideas and inspire you. But when it comes to actually thinning carrots or doing some kind of tedious work that doesn't necessarily warrant its own video, how do you do that? So I thought it would be fun to take you through a week in the life of, and this is in the beginning part of May, and I just thought maybe I could share with you some of the tasks that I'm doing during the week. And maybe especially if you're new, this might help you know how to do some of the smaller tasks in the garden that you run up against. One thing that's a regular practice of mine during this part of the season especially is a weekly walkthrough. Now usually this is on a day that I'm not doing garden work at all. I have to make myself, when I'm walking through my garden, not do work, because if I see something undone, I just want to stop everything and do it, and that just doesn't ever work. So I usually pick a Sunday where I just walk through my garden and I make note of what needs to get done. Usually I am itemizing this in my notes app on my phone, and I write down everything. And sometimes the list is super long. I know I'm not going to get to everything that week, but at least it serves as kind of a brain dump so that I can say, okay, it's on the list. And then it also helps me to tackle little projects here and there as I get margin in my day. But one thing that I do also is I prioritize. I look through that list and I think what's most important for me to get done right now. And those are the things that I get done first. Obviously, everything I'm going to show you today isn't everything that I'm doing in a particular week. Sometimes I took the camera out there with me, sometimes I didn't, but you'll at least get an idea of what I do, usually the first part of May. So I mentioned thinning carrots. I like to thin carrots early in the carrot growing process, usually once they start developing their first true leaves. And I'll try to thin them to about 1 inch per carrot, and it seems perfectly fine. But once the tops start getting really tall, I go back and I inspect them to see if I did a good enough thinning job the first time. And oftentimes I'll find that I still need to thin a little bit more. Not too much, but I know from experience that if the carrots are too close together, they're not going to get large. In this particular instance, I thinned way later than I usually do, so I was able to get some baby carrots, threw them in a pot roast, and it worked out well. I'm hoping I wasn't too late and the rest of them will continue growing larger. But typically I do like to make sure they're about 1 inch apart, center to center, if not 2 inches, just kind of depending. I kind of eyeball it. But that was one of the first tasks that I wanted to make sure to get done, because the longer I let those carrots grow, the more they're gonna not develop roots when they need to be developing roots. You may laugh at this, but when it comes to harvesting, I do add harvest tasks to my list. During the summer, it's really hard to prioritize, and harvesting is something that has to be done in many cases pretty quickly, or the quality of the product is not going to be good. In this case, these snap peas were ready to harvest. And if you've ever grown snap peas, you know that once they get to be a certain size, they're actually a little bit too thick to enjoy as snap peas. Now, if you open them up and you taste the peas inside them, they're so sweet and so delicious. I love the snack. So it's not like it's a terrible thing if I let them go too long, but I can't use them as snap peas like I want to. Also, picking peas continuously sends a signal to the plant to continue producing flowers, to continue producing pods. So if I don't harvest them regularly, then I'm gonna have a smaller harvest overall. And I just try to keep picking them until we start getting temperatures above 90, then they stop flowering. At that point, I'll take the peas out and I'll plant cucumbers. That's what I do with succession planting. But for now, my goal is to harvest these peas every few days and enjoy them while I can. Another task that I definitely needed to do is to add my plant supports to my green stalk planters, specifically with the tomatoes that I was growing and the potatoes that I'm growing. I was noticing these plants are doing amazing. They're doing so well, and they needed a little bit of extra support, especially the tomatoes and the potatoes. And even though I think the potatoes would have probably been okay, they were just growing so well that I wanted to make sure that they had a little bit of a brace just in case they got high winds or just the weight of the leaves caused a problem. The tomatoes always are going to need to have some kind of trellising. These are Golden Jubilee tomatoes, so they are an indeterminate variety, and I wanted to make sure to get those supports ready to go. Otherwise, we actually did have a windstorm, and before I put these plant supports on, one of the Golden Jubilees like blew over. Thankfully, it didn't snap, but they definitely can snap if I don't get them supported. So that was one thing that I knocked out on a pretty afternoon one day. This time of year, especially on sunny days, it's really hard to work in the greenhouse because it gets so hot. But one morning when it was a little bit overcast, I went out and did some work in the greenhouse. Usually by the end of May, all the way through probably August or September, I'm not doing anything in the greenhouse. It's just way too hot. I just don't have to use it because I'm growing outside. So I will miss those days of working in the greenhouse. It's one of my favorite things to do. But anyway, I did have some tasks that I needed to get done in the greenhouse. One thing that I wanted to do was to start a new round of marigolds. And the reason was because I've had all these beautiful pansies in my green stock. You saw that I planted those in my new green stock basket weave, and pansies don't like the heat. I can already tell they're getting a little stressed. We've had some temperatures in the mid 80s, pushing 90, and they're just not having it. But I love the flowers. I just want to keep having more flowers in my garden space. I never thought that I would be that flower person, but I'm becoming that. But I wanted to have them ready to go. Of course, I could go buy marigolds at the garden center, but they are just so easy to start from seed. And I just start them in my greenhouse in seed trays, and I keep them out there. I don't have to have them under lights or anything like that. But that way, when the pansies are looking bad and they're ready to go and they're just, you know, they're done for the season, I'll have another crop of marigolds in the waiting. So that's why I wanted to get those started so that they will be ready to plant whenever the pansies start going down. Another thing that I planted in the greenhouse, this will be the first time ever that I have ever planted this from seed indoors, and that is okra. The reason I did that is because I had two places in my big garden that I was going to plant okra this year. They were both in beds that I planted garlic, but in one particular garlic bed, that garlic is so huge and I had so many rows. I was really afraid to plant okra seeds in between them because I really didn't think they would get enough light in the beginning. And I thought I can either change what bed I'm going to grow that okra in later, or what if I try to start them from seed indoors and then they'll be tall enough to maybe still get in between that garlic or not, but I figured at the very least I could buy some time and see. But because okra develops a taproot, I've never been all that fond of starting them indoors or buying them from the garden center, even though I've had decent success with that my first year. I ended up planting them in the larger, the deeper Epic cell trays, and that way the root will have more room to expand compared to a more shallow tray. They sprouted really fast, and we'll see how it goes. It's a trial. I'm always trying new things, but that's something brand new. I did direct sow okra in other areas of my garden, but this is for sure a trial, and we'll see how it goes. Speaking of heading out into my main garden, even though I'm not planting as much in my main garden, there's a whole area that doesn't have anything planted. Even my daughter was like, "Mom, why is there just grass growing in your garden?" I was telling her I'm leaving that land fallow. I said, I feel like God's called me to slow down this year in my garden, and that particular ground bed was always so much work compared to my raised beds, so I'm just gonna let it rest. And it gave me a good opportunity to talk to her about how God commanded Israel to have the 7th year, let the land rest. And honestly, whether you're religious or not, so many studies are showing how beneficial letting the land rest actually is. So whether or not I end up planting in it next year, I'm not sure. I'm kind of liking all of the freedom that I have with just growing in raised beds in my green stalks and my containers. It makes me not want to go back to ground bed gardening, but you never know. We'll see what happens next year. But all that to say, I go out to that garden even though there isn't as much planted out there. And one thing I needed to do was get my peppers tied up. Now, a lot of times I will use tomato cages for peppers, especially if I just have a few here and there. But I had, I think 9, I can't remember how many bell peppers. You can see this in this video, but I had more peppers than I had cages available. So in that case, what I'll do is I'll put a tomato stake behind each pepper, but then I'll need to go and tie that pepper up to the stake. I didn't do that at the time of planting, I think because it started raining on me, but I needed to get out there and tie those peppers up. I have had more times when I've forgotten to do that and a storm has come and wind has snapped those peppers, and I don't want to do that. So I wanted to make sure and get those tied up, and they are really doing great. Speaking of peppers, one other thing I forgot to mention when I was in the greenhouse planting the marigold and the okra, I potted up some extra peppers that I had had from indoor seed starting. I was so tempted to just plant them somewhere, but going along with my theme this year of trying to simplify, I'm like, no, because the more you plant, the more you're gonna have to tend, and you do not need those peppers. So I texted a friend that I knew had a garden, and I said, would you want any of these peppers? And she wanted 2. So I needed to go ahead and pot them up so that way she wouldn't have to be in a rush to get them in the garden. And it would buy her a little bit of extra time. And 2, if I wasn't able to see her, then the plants wouldn't get more stressed because they were already pretty stressed having been in that container for too long. So anyway, I potted them up in a solo cup. I don't personally use solo cups anymore for potting up a transplanting. I used to use them all the time. It's a cheap alternative, and it's something I would recommend if you're on budget. But I don't like how tipsy they can get, especially when you get a really tall plant like a pepper or a tomato. I really like the containers that are more wide at the bottom and more sturdy. So that's what I use now. We're all, as gardeners, we level up usually as we're able to, but because I didn't want her to have to worry about giving me those containers back, I potted them up into solo cups. The main thing I needed to do is poke a hole in the bottom just for drainage. And I got those potted up and got them to her, and hopefully they'll thrive in her garden. But that was one other thing that I had to do. I had other peppers. I was able to find them a home just the same. So I was able to get all the peppers out of my greenhouse, which was a huge relief because I didn't need them. They were just extras that I had oversown, and I'm glad that they were able to go to a good home, and I won't have to have more peppers to have to manage than I had planned. Oh, there's a cardinal right there. I love my birds around here. They make me so happy. I'm becoming one of those people. Flowers and birds. That's what happens when you get older, maybe. Obviously, these tasks were not huge tasks. Like I said, this time of year, a lot of my tasks are just lots of little things that need to be done, but again, it helps to make a list. And if you like learning the more nuanced part of the gardening process, if you want more videos like this, then let me know. I'd love to share more with you behind the scenes, the little things, because the little things do make a big difference. So let me know if you enjoyed this, and thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again on the next video.